Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Good to have you all with us. The photos we've all seen of the bodies of Oscar Martinez and his 23-month-old daughter, Valeria, lying face down among the reeds in the murky, muddy water along the U.S.-Mexico border gripped this nation and the world. Then came to light the horrendous conditions, the filth, the lack of sanitation that children who had crossed the border were being held in after human rights workers visited those facilities. In the midst of all of this, revealed horror, the head of ICE resigned on the heels of the Homeland Security Secretary resigning, which was a couple of months back. And now the battle over the $4.6 billion for aid for the border seems to be tearing apart the Democrats and showing the crisis that is splitting this nation, is splitting people in this nation. We'll be covering this, and today we talk with Eddie Carmona, who is Legislative Director of Pico, California. And Eddie, welcome to Real News. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here.
So things really are unfolding very quickly in all of this. There were reports that I heard on public radio first and then read in the New York Times and read in some other journals about the conditions as children are being kept in, separated from their families, from the people who they came over with. And I'll read some of the quotes here in just a moment, but to give us a piece of reflection on this. But so, I'm curious when you found out about this, how long you've known about this, and your thoughts.
Yeah, in terms of just the decision happening, we found out, a few minutes before it broke in terms of the decision that was going to happen. I think part of this is it's just kind of, it's disgusting to me to know that we're throwing more money, $4.6 billion at border enforcement and detention when we really need to be investing that money into more judges and more infrastructure for people to get their asylum processed. People are fleeing countries in countries that are dealing with horrendous situations. Part of it, what we've had influence in destabilizing some of these Latin American countries and have a history of that. So the fact that there's no accountability, there is no mechanisms in check for them to not use this money to do more enforcement, do more security, all of that stuff. This is just another way for Trump to get money for his militarized operation at the border. So we really need to do something different about it. And I think the American people need to step up and contact their member of Congress.
So let's talk a bit for a moment just about that. I want to come back to the border, but I want to talk about this battle going on in Congress and what your assessment is. When you see the tweet that Mark Pocan from Wisconsin, the congressman, sent out, which almost caused, from what was described to me on the floor, it was like 1854, almost a physical battle on the floor between he and other people from the caucus that negotiates with conservatives. And he wrote in his tweet that set them off, "Since when did the Problem Solvers Caucus become the Child Abuse Caucus? Wouldn't they want to at least fight against contractors who run deplorable facilities? Kids are the only ones who could lose today." So in that back and forth, the argument seems to be, from the Pelosi side, wait, before we do this, I want to play a little piece that I think is important for context.
Sure.
So this is, I think, the Speaker Pelosi speaking as she was pushing for the original bill that the House voted on.
Today, we have the opportunity to help the children. We are ensuring that children have food, clothing, sanitary items, shelter, and medical care. We are providing access to legal assistance, and we are protecting families because families belong together. Our legislation is a vote against the cruel attitude toward children of this administration. This bill does not fund the administration's failed mass detention policy. Instead, it funds effective, humane alternatives to detention that have a proven record of success. And it creates strong oversight by Congress so that we can protect children and ensure this crisis never occurs again.
So the original tweet came after this, and this was what she said when she was fighting for the bill in Congress, which we can talk about. And then let me give you one more tweet, and then we'll dive into this for a moment, all right?
Sure.
This is a tweet from Ocasio-Cortez, the new congresswoman from New York, when she tweeted, "Under no circumstances should the House vote for a McConnell-only bill with no negotiation with Democrats. Hell no. That's an abdication of power we should refuse to accept. They will keep hurting kids if we do." So Talk a bit about this battle going on. I mean, Nancy Pelosi pushed it and really looked as if she was going to go to war. Then McConnell pushed back. And because there's no accountability, apparently, in terms of keeping the people who run these private prisons and what they're going to be held accountable, what's happening to the kids. So talk a bit about your sense and analysis of this battle going on.
I mean, it's obviously clear, right, that number one, let me just say this. I think the biggest thing that we have to look about, putting all politics aside, and it's just as a human level, at a human being level, members of Congress, Republican and Democrat, need to be held accountable. We're talking about children here. We're talking about situations that are extremely devastating. In any other country, we'd call this a humanitarian crisis of what's happening with kids at the border. And the fact that we're having a conversation about making sure that these kids who are being placed in traumatic situations that are creating generational trauma, the fact that we're talking about how to care for them in these deplorable situations is ridiculous. I mean, so when it comes to just stripping everything down from, Democrat, Republican, or even the fights amongst Democrats, we have to view this as a human issue. This is a situation that we've never seen before in this country. And when we have seen it before, it's been associated with some of the worst regimes in the history of the country and in the world. So I think, one, we have to just recognize that for what it is. And then number two, the fact that, to get to your questions, to get to your statement, Mark, the fact that we're politicizing this again, coming up to an election, which is what is happening amongst the Democrats. And I know the Mod Dems in Congress are worried about losing their seats and being soft on enforcement and soft on crime. This is all part of that equation. And the simple fact that now we're putting kids at the center of this politicization, and the dynamic that's occurring at the border with kids being put in cages and the generational trauma that's occurring it's disgusting. And for moderate Dems and Republicans to be saying we're going to use this as an opportunity to beef up the border enforcement, to add more detention facilities, to continue an inhumane practice of locking up families coming from Latin America, from Central American countries, it's ridiculous and it's disgusting, and it makes me ashamed that these are the people that are representing us.
Let me go to the heart of what I think is part of this argument among Democrats, especially in what's happening with this bill that came through the House and then went to the Senate, is that the moderate Democrats and others are arguing that look, we have to put the money to the border. These kids are living in filthy conditions, horrendous conditions. If you read the reports of the human rights lawyers and others who saw what was going on in Clinton, Texas. So if we don't vote yes, then the kids get nothing. We just can't leave them there. So how do you respond to that?
Where's the accountability at? There's no accountability in this bill that states that they have to direct it. I mean, some of the things that I read is that, they have to give a notification to lawmakers within 24 hours after a child dies. That's the conversation that we're having, or that a child cannot be held in detention for no longer than 90 days. That's 3 months. And those are the kinds of conversations we're having, as opposed to these children should not be put in cages and detention. So yes, we do need to address the situation that's happening, and we need to address the disgusting situation that these kids are being put in. But I don't see any accountability that states that money has to go for those specific reasons, which is a problem in itself. And even if we're not addressing the issue of having our kids and families being put in these situations, there's still no mechanism that I've seen or that I've read in the bill that is going to make sure that money is going for those purposes.
So, there was a quote in the New York Times that I really just grabbed me, because I've been really following closely and talking about the situation around Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's comment about concentration camps and that's blown up. And as a person personally who grew up in a home with people with numbers in their arms, knowing what that means, it really hit home to me as well and tore me up a little bit, trying to figure out how to respond to that. But then this quote really says something to us. And I think this is in the New York Times from a man named Juan Martinez, who works for Pride Fitness Gym in Clinton, Texas. And he said, almost like a concentration camp, I mean, they're not killing them, but they're treating them like animals. They need basic hygiene. So I'm curious a couple of things from your perspective as a person who's in this every day. What should be our response? I mean, what should be your response? What should be the response of people who say that we can't do this? We can't allow this to tumble into anything that incarcerates people in this way. Do we surround the camps? I mean, what do you do?
Right. Well, one of the things that we did here in California last summer and in subsequent different gatherings since then is we went to the Otay Mesa Detention Center as prophetic leaders and clergy that stood up, and we placed the label on the Encore Civics site that said concentration camp, because what they're doing is they're treating human beings and our loved ones as if they're cattle and if they're animals. So part of what's happening around sort of just the criminalization, what is really, really concerning to us is that you're creating, just like they did with the native tribes here, but with the boarding schools, just like they did with children during Japanese internment, just like they did in the history of this country, we're doing it again. And this administration doesn't give a damn about the families coming across the border. All they see it as an opportunity is to capitalize on more profit making and more money making off of the bodies of Black and brown bodies. So this situation, people in the United States, you need to stand up and do not let them just sort of normalize the situation of dead bodies coming across the river, of children being in cages, of children facing these crazy conditions inside these detention centers. And if this doesn't move you to action, to not only get out and vote in 2020, but to contact your member of Congress, to hit the streets and go outside these detention centers and mass mobilize to stand up for what we don't support in this country. What's happening right now, these are not values that this country were founded on, and these are not the values that they're based upon. So I think people need to stand up in any way, shape, or form possible, and definitely get out to vote in 2020, because what's happening right now is unacceptable.
Eder Carmona, I appreciate you taking the time with us today and the work you do with Pico, California. And please stay in touch. We want to stay on top of this with you and continue to put the pressure on. Thank you so much for your work and joining us today.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Good to
Take
talk
care of
to you.
yourself.
And I'm Mark Steiner here with the Real News Network. Thank you all for joining us. We'll stay on top of this one, no question. Take care.